Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. This is quite an honor. I want to take you back just a few years in television broadcast journalism, because the idea that we would even be talking about breast cancer on any evening news broadcast is not something that has been around for a long time. My friend Leslie Stahl, when she was working for Walter Cronkite, was summoned to an area of CBS News known as the Fishbowl, where all the white men in journalism made the decisions as to what you were going to see that night. And Leslie was summoned because there was a report in the New England Journal of Medicine that the number of C-sections was escalating in this country. And Walter wanted to know from Leslie whether she thought that might be important. And not only did Leslie think that might be important, but for the first time ever in broadcast journalism, what would have been described as soft woman's story not only was on CBS Evening News, but led CBS Evening News. And in that moment, there was a paradigm shift for what we consider news. It wasn't just foreign policy, what was going on in the Senate and the House that day, and of course, any international news. It was news that could affect every American and the kind of quiet conversations that take place at our dinner tables every night. And in that moment, we shifted. So let me take you now 40 years later to a simple Monday where we knew that a task force was going to release new guidelines on mammography. Now, I've been doing broadcast journalism since the late 80s. My background is that I'm a head and neck cancer surgeon. I've been a broadcast journalist at ABC News and NBC News. I cover the boring news you can use, like how not to get a heart attack when you shovel snow, to what seems to be sometimes the kinds of stuff where you really have to understand statistics. My life as a journalist can go from, I cannot believe people want to hear this, it's so boring, to, oh my God, this is so complicated, can I put it in simple enough words so as not to talk down to a high school graduate, but such that a PhD might say, wow, that's interesting. So that's sort of my personal take on this. So we knew the guidelines were coming, and Monday evening on NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, I explained these new guidelines. Now, let me give you the behind the curtain sort of look at this. Brian Williams' sister died of breast cancer. So breast cancer stories matter to Brian. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that whenever anyone has lost someone from breast cancer, they look at diseases differently. I don't care if it's colon, I don't care if it's heart attack, I don't care if it's breast. You bring a certain amount of personal investment to whatever that topic is that evening. And my job, with Brian as the anchor, is to give him the information that I think is scientifically down the middle and not bend toward the fact that I know he has a personal investment in this. And we all know where the controversy was, this 40 to 49-year-old age group. So I presented the task force findings, who they were, what their charge was, what they found, end of story, no big deal. Really thought we hit it out of the ballpark. Kaboom. The next morning, and now this is where I'm editorializing and not giving the facts, just because I want to make sure Gary knows that now I know I'm stepping in my editorial action. I do not believe that the American College of Radiology nor the Komen Foundation read the task force report. Nonetheless, there were, well, because I don't think anybody read it but the task force, there were, of course, the gauntlet was thrown down, and it was this cry of the word, the dirty little word, the R word, rationing. Now, this report could not have been issued at a worse time. If I could have given any kind of behind-the-scenes report advice to this to the task force, I would have said, "Can you sit on this for a few months? Could you maybe push it back till March?" But at the height of health care reform and the craziness of people screaming at each other, these new guidelines were issued. And we all know what happened. It was seen as depriving women of their health care rights. More women would die. It was the government and the big bad insurers taking away a woman's right to be screened. And the one person I personally, as a friend and journalist, turned to, Dr. Susan Love, decided to be out of the country. I mean, talk about straining a friendship. So normally when I get things that are so complicated, it's a fast, Susan, is this important? Susan, is it not? Well, Susan is MIA in China. So I looked at the data. I looked at the cry, the sort of, I would say, advocacy for all the wrong reasons with big money at stake cry the following morning. And what then happened was something I never would have envisioned, which was a runaway train of every night for 5 nights on nightly news talking about breast cancer. So to go from Walter Cronkite, where I'm not so sure we should do this, to Brian Williams, we'll talk about breasts every night for 5 nights. This, ladies and gentlemen, was a paradigm shift. So not only did we talk about it on nightly news, we talked about it on the Today Show, we talked about it on cable, I blogged about it, and we even did a segment on Meet the Press, where Nancy Brinker and I sat down and talked about what this all meant. I maintained then, and I maintain as much today, that we are in a very interesting place in this country. We have access to more information and news than ever before, and at the same time, we are teetering on the brink of becoming scientifically illiterate. We don't like the messages sometimes, so we decide to kill the messenger. Perhaps it's time to look at the message and weigh the pros and cons. You know, science is messy. Science changes. And we all want to know that what we're told today is going to be the comfort factor of that's how life will be 2, 3, 4 years from now. But that's not how science works. It's a moving train. And what I tell you today is what I know today. It will be different tomorrow. And everyone in this room wants it to be different tomorrow and 5 years from now and 10 years from now. But what we have to do as a populace is take the information we're given, and especially on broadcast news, and say, is that right? Is it relevant? Does it make sense? Is it one more piece of information I can take and talk to my physician about? But in this case, politics and passion got in the way of the science, to the point that Kathleen Sebelius, and I'm editorializing again, I believe threw her scientists under the bus when she came on the Today Show 2 days later and said, well, what we're saying is that women should just keep doing what they're doing. No, that's not what the task force said. What the task force said was very clear. Between the ages of 40 and 49, mammography does not work as well. So individualize who you are and talk to your physician. This is a piece of information. Do with it as you like. As Susan says, no one was taking away your right to be irradiated. What they were saying was that perhaps, if you have no risk factors and you are 42, perhaps you don't need to start screening the same way as the woman who lives next door to you. Everything you learn and everything you hear is yet another piece of information. But we are going to dig ourselves into a very dangerous place if we don't take the rhetoric and the scare tactics out of all of this and start looking at information intelligently. And that means sometimes taking things that are a little unpalatable and saying, you know what? I'm willing to entertain what it means. Just give it to me straight. We're all smart enough to make our own decisions. But I would charge you that as you consume your information through television and the web and print and radio, to remember that there's a lot of money and a lot of partisan groups and a lot of politics taking their own agendas into what should be a purely scientific arena. We can all be advocates, and we can all be passionate about something, but at the end of the day, science is science, and we sometimes need to leave our passions and our own biases outside of the arena, work with the science, and then move it forward politically and, I think, scientifically correct. It's the charge of this group, I know, and it certainly is my charge as a broadcast journalist. Thank you.